In this video, I'm going to walk you step by step on how to model a simple 3D object of a cake. This will give me an opportunity to show you some tools as well as talk about some important concepts when it comes to 3D modeling. So thinking about a cake, it's just going to be a stereotypical kind of cartoony looking sort of cake. So if I think about the overall shape of that, I'm going to start with a cylinder since that's kind of close to cake shaped. I'm just going to create it as the default settings, and then I'm going to go to the attribute editor and find the correct node to make my adjustments here to make it closer to the correct size. So if I'm thinking a cake, maybe a 9-inch sort of birthday cake with a diameter about 9 inches, that would be about 4 or 5 inches for a radius, which translates to, I don't know, we'll just do an even maybe 10 centimeters. That seems, it might be a bigger cake, but it's probably close enough for what we're doing. And height wise, let's do, what does 10 look like? 10 might be a little bit tall, maybe an 8 centimeter. That should be a pretty reasonable looking cake to start with. I do want to add some more subdivision axis, probably up to 36, just to make it really smooth. Since we are kind of going with a cartoony sort of look, I do want it to look nice, and that is our basic shape. Before I really get started, I do want to do two more things. I want to first rename it cake, and then I'm going to make sure that the pivot point is in the correct spot. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently. We can do a vertex snap to the bottom, but I kind of want to show you what if the vertex isn't there. So this birthday cake, I do not need to have these polys on the bottom. So in order to show you how to kind of fix the pivot without those there, I'm going to go ahead and go to my modeling toolkit. And I'm going to select all the polygons on the bottom. And a trick to do this, so by default, if I were to come down here, click and drag to select those, I'm also selecting the top ones, and I don't really need to delete those top ones. So how can we do this in a quick way? There is an option over here underneath the modeling toolkit. If you see right here, this camera-based selection. If I turn this on, what it does is if I then click and drag, it's only going to select the polygons the camera can see. So if I do that and then rotate around, you can see it did not select those ones since I can't see them. So I do want to make sure I remember to turn that back off, but that can be a handy way to select things is by turning your camera-based selection on and off. So let me delete those. All right, so let's say I have this and I do want that pivot point to be, in the bottom center. So how do I do that now that there's no vertex to snap it to? I'm going to do a grid snap. And first of all, I will need to move this upwards some, so that it is sitting right on that grid. How much do I move it up? I can go ahead and select one of these bottom vertices. I see it is at -4. So since that bottom row is at -4, I know I need to move this whole thing up by 4. I can just go ahead and type that in, and it is now sitting directly on that grid. Now I'll be able to move my pivot to here by snapping to grid. So I'm going to hit Edit Pivot with my Move tool on. And I am going to, at object mode, I don't want to accidentally be stuck in face mode to do this Edit Pivot because it's not going to be editing it correctly. I need to be in object mode and hit Edit Pivot. I'm going to then hold the X key, and X means I will then snap to the grid. You can see it kind of snapping around. I want to put it directly on that grid. I can always double check that I did snap it to the origin because it is now at 0, 0, 0. If I had done it wrong, like if I had accidentally snapped it one over, I would see that it's not at 0, 0, 0. I'd still need to edit that pivot to snap directly to that grid. Okay. Grid is pivot's correct. My shape is correct. I have renamed it. Before I do get into 3D modeling, what I am going to want to do is I am going to want to hit freeze transform and delete my history. Remember, when we start doing things, we start getting those nodes in our attribute editor, and we want to kind of clear them out once we're at a place that we know we want to be solid. So we are now ready to start 3D modeling. Honestly, the basic shape of the cake is going to be pretty easy. We have this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all the way around by double clicking. It's going to select that ring, and I'm going to bevel this. So I'm going to click bevel, and that's a little bit strong. I do want to up those segments to 2, but I don't really want a cake quite with that roundness to it. So I'm going to lower that fraction down. And you know what? As I look at it, maybe like a 0.1. I think that might be still a little bit hard. I'm going to jump that segment up to 3. So I have like a nice kind of smooth looking cake. So I'm satisfied. I'm going to hit Q to change it out to my select tool. And then I'm going to deselect it to take a look at that. And it looks like to me, if you watched the steel drum video first, I'm having an issue with my hardness, softness on this edge. You see how sharp it is? We don't want that. We want that to be a nice smooth edge. So let me go and select it real quick. I'm going to double click it. And I do have this down here kind of as a shortcut key, and I'll have another video that explicitly shows how to set up your own custom shelf, but it is a tool I use a lot. So if you haven't seen that video, if you go up here underneath mesh display, it's just harden and soften right here. So I'm going to click soften edge, and we have a nice soft edge now to our cake. Very smooth. It's a fondant style cake. Okay, base cake done. The next thing I want to do is I do want to add some decorations. The first one is maybe like a nice kind of frosting decoration that kind of goes around the end of this. And I could probably extrude it out from here. Do I have enough polys to do that? No, I'm going to do it separately because I'm going to do some fanciness with it, with messing with some polys, and I don't want to mess up this nice mesh flow. So I'm going to actually create a whole new cylinder. So let me make a new cylinder. I can't see it because it's by default pretty small. Let me go ahead and change the attributes to it. Let me bump up that radius. And it's going to be like a little frosting kind of decoration. Maybe something, it doesn't have to be too big because again, it's frosting. But let me change, do I want it just at 20? I'm thinking 20 is probably fine. So it is a little bit different than this one. And let me make sure that the height is okay. So let me make this a nice number. We'll make the radius 11. The height as 2. That's probably fine. I'm going to have to bump it up. No, we'll make it 1 because I have to move it up anyway. We don't want it sunk into the floor like that. And we'll call it a day. This is just going to be our frosting. And let me delete some faces. So I do not need the top and bottom faces. So I'm going to go and, well, let's do this first. No, I don't need to move my pivot. I'm good with that since this is not going to be my ultimate final piece. So I'm going to just select, click and drag those top and bottom and delete them. And I'm going to double click all the way around. And I do want to make sure that on the Y axis, this is set to 0. And I'm going to move this up to 1. Okay. So let's kind of make this fancy. So first things first, I'm going to double click this. I'm going to then get I'm going to keep the move tool, but I'm going to hold down shift and extrude upwards. I do have my step snap turn to absolute set to 0.5 centimeters, and that's fine. That's pretty close to what I want to work with. And once I have it up, I'm going to then use my scale tool. Notice I am not holding down shift still. I don't need to extrude this anymore. I just want to scale it inwards. It is a little bit faceted, you see that? So let's go ahead and fix that right now. All of the edges need to be fixed. I think all but the bottom, but it's fine. I'm just going to select all of them and soften them. And let's give this some more shape. So I'm going to show you something really fun with this now. So we kind of want to make the whole thing a little bit more bumpy, like it's kind of like a pastry chef did a lot of really fun work with this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my select tool. I'm going to select one, hold shift, select around, hold shift, click here, double click to select around so that I have all of them selected. I'm then going to do my bevel, but not nearly so much, like a 0.1. And I want my segments to be set to 2. You see that? Okay. Then I'm going to go and select these faces. Actually, no, let's do it this way. I'm going to do it a different way. I need to select all of these middle all these middle edges. So I'm going to double click on one, hold shift, double click all the way around. A better way to do this would be to use be modeling part of it and mirror it, but for the sake of time, or just to kind of get some more repetition in practicing using the tool, oops, I'm not going to do that. But if you are a more advanced user and you want to, it's selecting weird now, model part of it and then mirror it, that would be a better method. But let's practice our selection. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to get my scale tool and I'm going to scale it inwards. You see that? That's kind of pushing it in. If I were to deselect it, it looks kind of funny now, but we're getting there. We're getting there. I want to make sure I go ahead and select these edges here. I just double click this to select around and soften it. And let's see that, check that look. Still a little bit harsh. So let's go ahead and bevel this one. Deselect it. Oof, all those hard edges. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to select all of them again and soften them. And last, we need to kind of fix the issue where it's not quite going out enough. So I am going to select all these. I'm just, hold on. Let me hide this cake first. This will be easier to show you what I'm doing. So I'm just going to, I need to select all of these. And again, it would be more efficient to just do part of this and mirror it. But if you're still trying to practice using the tools and learning the shortcut keys, it's not necessarily a bad thing to try this. So going all the way around. And I'm going to then do a connect to connect one in the center. And I want it directly in the center, so that's good. All right, so they're still selected. I hit enter, they're still selected. I want to get my scale tool again, and I'm going to scale these outwards to kind of puff them outwards a little bit like that. And then upwards, we're kind of puffing them out. And it's going to still be a little bit sharp, so let's bevel those. And that looks pretty good. That's going to look pretty good. These are probably going to be really hard edged because it is, whenever we do bevels, it loves to hard edge those. So let me go ahead and select them all again and soften. There we go. Let's turn on that rest of the cake. I'm just selecting it and hitting H. And we have a nice little kind of frosting around that bottom. And that was just step by step, adding some bevels or adding some connects and making sure to soften my edges. And I didn't do it all at once. I went a little bit at a time and checked it, a little bit at a time and checked it. So that we could get like that nice sort of puffy look to it. All right, so I want to put some decorations on the top, and I think I want to do kind of like a cartoon cherry, maybe sitting on a little dollop of cream or something like that, and have them nicely spaced. So I don't want to model like a whole bunch of them. I'm going to want to model one of them and duplicate them. And I want to be able to do this kind of quickly. So let's model the cherry first. That's probably going to be the easiest thing. So let me create a sphere. And let me move it. I'm going to move it over here just for size. And you know what? That's not too bad of a size. That's probably pretty accurate for a cherry. I think it's going to be like 2 centimeters. Let's see. Yeah, so 2 centimeters, and that's pretty close to cherry size. Excuse me. So let's work with that. I probably can cut these down maybe to something like a 16. Oh, let's try a 12. And the height too, we can just, let's see. Let's do 8. It's a nice amount. It is really faceted looking, but we know how to fix that, thankfully. So let's use this, and we can hide everything else while we're working on this. So I'm going to hide the frosting. I'm just selecting it and hitting H. Hide the cake. Let's move this to the origin. I'm not going to worry about its pivot point since I'm going to be doing a lot of other stuff with it, or with other things, so we can kind of ignore that. So let's make this a little more cherry-like. So first thing, let's make that not so faceted. So I'm going to go to edge, select all those edges and smooth them. And I'm going to grab this vertice right in the middle and kind of push it in. Actually, you know what? My step snaps on, and I probably want to turn that off. Let's push that in. Usually cherries have like a little bit of an indent to them, even cartoon ones. Let me select this one. I'm going to kind of push it a little bit. And I do need a stem. I do want to make a stem out of this. So I could just make a new cylinder and kind of pull it out. What if I wanted to actually just kind of extrude it outwards though? This is probably a little too large for a stem. So what I can do is I can get my select. Oops, let's try it again. Will it let me? No, it's going to be a pain. Okay, I'll just click them all the way around. I could, if I wanted to as well, turn my camera base selection on and drag it because it will only select those. That is another method too. Let me turn that back off. And I'm going to do a connect, but I want to pinch, slide or pinch? I think slide, let's see. Maybe like a 0.8. Yeah, because we want it to be kind of small because it's just a little stem. And that looks about right. Hit enter. I'm going to go ahead and select those faces. Again, let me just turn camera base selection on. So I can click and drag, turn it off. And before I extrude, I'm going to push it a little. There we go. And then I'm going to hold shift to turn my extrude on and just pull upwards. It's a little bit stiff, so let's do this. Let's pull it down. I'm going to use the scale tool to scale it just a little bit. I'm then going to hold shift to extrude it up. I can then use my rotate tool. Rotate that just a little bit. Then move it over. Hold shift again to extrude and kind of pull it over. That looks pretty good. Looks like a little cherry stem. We don't need to have it be crazy. But notice it is very faceted, so I feel like a broken record, but changing your hardness, softness is dramatically going to change the look of this. So let me select those and soften it. We got our cherry. It does need to sit kind of on a dollop of cream because that would be really fun. So let me, kind of like the one on the bottom, it's not going to be as fancy, but I can just start with a cylinder. I'm going to go to the attribute editor and make it a little bit wider. Oops, not that wide, maybe like a 1.25. And the height, we just set it to 1. I am going to delete out those faces, top and bottom. Let me bring this edge all the way up to 0. And I can start kind of forming this. So I might move the cherry up a little bit, because it's supposed to be kind of sitting on top of it. And I'm just kind of eyeballing this now. Okay. I'm going to hold shift to extrude upwards. Then I'm going to scale it in. And I'm just trying to block in the basic shape of it. It's okay if it's rough. Kind of like before, is we're kind of like, well, we are sculptors. We're sculpting kind of like that rough shape. And then we can take a look at it. And we say, it's not quite there yet. First of all, let's soften those edges to see what it looks like. And then we probably want to bevel this. That's kind of too hard. So I'm going to select that, get my bevel. You know, that might not be too bad since it's supposed to be kind of like a dollop. We gotta soften those before we can really judge it though. Let's see. That works. It looks like a little, someone put some maybe whipped cream and then dropped the cherry on it. Yeah? Okay. Good enough for now. If you do want to be a little more advanced with this though, we know that none of these polygons underneath are ever going to be seen since it is kind of shoved into that whipped cream. So we could, if we were good 3D modelers, we should just delete these faces because they're never going to be seen by anybody. I'm going to just go ahead and delete those because it's going to be sitting like this. We need to prepare this to be put on the cake, and we're going to have to, we don't want to model this a bunch of times. So we're going to kind of treat this as almost like a game object in an engine where we're going to set one up nicely and then we can duplicate it a bunch of times. And one of the ways that we did this was inadvertently is I made sure the pivot point was at the origin at 0, 0, 0. So make sure that you do that as well. And we then need to attach this as a single object. So we have that and this one. Remember, if we hold shift before we click combine, we can get some, a little dialog box up. And the important one is the pivot position. It's already sitting at the origin. So we might as well just say, keep this at the world origin, rather than the last object selected, and we definitely don't want it to be in the center of the object. So we make sure that's selected and we hit apply and close. Before we can start placing this on our cake though, we do need to clean it up, because remember, we get these little ugly things left over because it's still needed for our attribute editor. So to get rid of them, we are going to select all of them. I'm just holding shift and clicking on all of them, and I'm first going to freeze its transform. Oops, no, I'm sorry. We're first going, did you see what, oh, we don't want that. That is completely wrong. We want to delete its history first. Then we can freeze its transform. It was really nice and deleted out all the garbage for us. If for some reason there's any of those left behind, you can always just delete them out after you delete its history. I'm just going to rename this to Cherry to make it easier to find. All right, let's turn on the rest of our cake. So I'm going to select these and hit H. I'm going to grab that cherry and I'm going to start to position it. So I'm going to hit spacebar and then over the top hit spacebar again. I might want one in the center. That's kind of cute to have one in the center. So I think I'll leave that one there. We should know the height. If we don't remember, we can always go back to our cake model and see what the height of one of these vertices is, and it's at 8. So we know that these need to be at a height of 8. Honestly, sinking them in like it was, just a teeny tiny little bit, is probably a good practice to be in. But let's duplicate these around now evenly on all of those, and I'm going to show you a very fun way to do this, and it'll also kind of teach you a little bit more about pivot points. All right, so we have our one. We need to then put them all the way around. So I'm going to first hit Control D to duplicate it. So we have Cherry, Cherry 1. I'm going to hide this one in the center. So I'm going to select it and hit H. And it doesn't look like I did anything because there are two on top of each other, and that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and reselect this one. I'm then going to position this either on one of these axes. So I don't want to just grab it and try to position it. I kind of want to keep it nice and clean so that like the X is staying at 0 and the Z is moving at a nice number. And I'm going to position it maybe right on the end. I could always push it out a little bit and then sink it in if I kind of want to break that surface a little, and that might be kind of nice. If I deselect it, what it looks like. And once I'm satisfied with that, we then need to duplicate them nicely around. And you should not be doing this. I shouldn't be just hitting Control D, eyeball, Control D, eyeball. It's going to be, one, it's going to take you a while. And two, it's going to be really messy. We kind of want to place this really nicely. So instead, watch this. I am going to change its pivot point, because remember, the pivot point is where we do all our transforms at. So moving it around, it moves at the pivot point. Scaling, it scales from that pivot point. It also does our rotate from that pivot point. So if I change its pivot point location, I can change where it rotates from. So watch this. I'm going to select it. I'm going to get my edit pivot on the object level. I'm going to do a vertex snap to, remember this cake has that vertice that's right in the center. It looks strange. You see how this now has its pivot point not on it? Because watch what happens now. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. And if I get my rotate tool, it's rotating off of there, so I can very easily place these all the way around. So let's find a nice number. Let's do a little bit of math. So I could probably fit, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I could easily fit probably 12. I want to pick a nice number like that, so I can rotate it at a really easy way. So 12. How many angles? How many degrees in a circle 360 degrees. 360 degrees divided by 12, and there's nothing wrong if you want to pull up your calculator just to make sure you're doing this accurately. 360 divided by 12. That means that each rotation needs to be 30 degrees, right? Okay, on the Y, this Y rotation. So I have my first cherry. I'm going to come over here, type 30. Control D. Go back to Y, type 30. Control D. Oops, I need to, if it's not working, this is a little bit of annoyance. You have to make sure your viewport is active. Then click in here. Oops, no, that's not what I'm doing. Sorry. Control D. 30. I'm just kind of clicking in the viewport to make sure it's active. Control D. 30. Control D, 30. I usually, to reactivate the viewport, a quicker way is just to hold the Alt middle so that you kind of pan for a second, and then you can do your Control D and just type in 30. Control D, 30. Control D, 30. Control D, 30. And we are almost done, but isn't this a lot quicker and a lot more accurate? There we go. If it really bothers you that those stems, you know, are kind of all very evenly placed and you want them to be a little bit more not so clean, after you're done placing them, we could always go back, select one. If we go to our rotate tool and we double click it, oh no, I'm sorry. Will this work? No, we gotta reset those. Let's go to edit pivot. We don't really want to eyeball this. Instead, oops, sorry about that. We can double click our rotate tool, and we can actually have a bunch more ways to edit our pivot points. I haven't shown this to you yet. It is something maybe to take a look at, because what I can do is I can click edit pivot and reset it, and it'll put it back in the center of the object. So I could then go ahead and just like rotate these, select this one, edit pivot, reset, turn off edit pivot, kind of rotate them. Not really necessary, but if it just really bothers you that it's so even, we can add a little bit of differentiation by just doing that after they're placed. And we need to turn that final cherry on, and we have a very beautiful cake. Last, this would not be ready to take out of the Maya yet, because we have all of these little objects and we do not want all of these little objects. So what I'm going to do, select them all, hold down Shift to combine, just to double check that we are putting that back at the world origin. Hit apply, close that. We have all that garbage, so let's hold Shift and select all that. Delete our history, freeze our transform, rename this back to cake, not cake 1, and we are good to go. We have this very beautiful, oops, not that one, sorry, cartoon cake, and it was not too bad to make. I might use this as an example in a later lesson to discuss unwrapping, so you might want to keep a copy of this. Hopefully you had fun modeling this cake.